Hi everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. I hope by now you've managed to watch both of my videos on Joseph's life in Leicester and Joseph's life in London, and those two are what I believe to be Joseph's true story. I think there is more to Joseph Merrick than a freak show and a 1980s film, and it's something I feel really passionately about, is getting Joseph's story actually out there. The actual true story of the Elephant Man, not an idea of who he was. So today I've brought you to Welford Road Cemetery in Leicester, where Joseph's uncle Charles Barnabas Merrick is buried. Now, his uncle Charles was the one who looked after him for a couple of years before he went into the workhouse, and I'll also show you his mother's grave. So I'm going to turn it round and we're going to walk up now to meet Uncle Charles and his wife and the rest of the Merrick family. So I'm going to turn you round. Okay, see you in a bit. So here we are at Welford Road Cemetery in Leicester. There are about 40,000 plots here and about 10,000 having memorials. So you can tell it's a rather large cemetery. And it's a rather lovely cemetery, and I will do another YouTube channel here and give you some stories of the people that are actually buried here. So we're walking up to Joseph's uncle's grave, his uncle Charles Barnabas Merrick. Now, it was Charles that looked after Joseph from approximately the age of 15 till 17 until he went into the Leicester Union workhouse. So here we are. And what I'll do, I'll also give you a bit of history about the Merrick family as well, because I think it's very important to know about Joseph's past. You know, because that's what makes the person, doesn't it? The family and what was going on around him. So this is the grave of Charles Barnabas Merrick. You can see here. There he is, Charles Barnabas Merrick. So Joseph's ancestors originate from London's East End. The name Barnabas was a common name given to many of the boys in the Merrick family. Joseph's great-grandfather was called Barnabas Merrick. Now, Barnabas Merrick is buried in an unmarked grave, just roughly behind Charles Merrick here, but it is actually unmarked, so it is somewhere around this point. Now, Joseph's grandfather Barnabas came to Leicester in 1837 with his third wife, Sarah Rockley. Now, he had actually married 3 times. His first marriage to Mary Ann Bowden produced 5 children. And when she died, Barnabas left them in the East End of London. One of his children, who he had left in the East End, was Charles Barnes Merrick, and he was actually transported to Van Diemen's Land in 1840 for stealing pork, aged 16. Now, Joseph's grandfather Barnabas and his wife Sarah settled in Leicester. Now, Sarah was from Bulcote in Nottingham, and her name was Sarah Rockley Merrick. Just scanning a bit of Welford Road Cemetery for you. There we go. And we'll just come back round to the Merrick's grave. There we go. So Sarah and Barnabas had 3 sons: Joseph Rockley Merrick, Henry Merrick and Charles Barnabas Merrick. And this was Charles Barnabas with Joseph's uncle, who he stayed with until he went into the Leicester Union workhouse. So Barnabas, Joseph's grandfather, was a wood turner, and he died on the 12th of April 1856 at the hospital cottages at the Leicester Union workhouse. So Charles Barnabas Merrick, Joseph's uncle. Charles was born in 1846. He was a hairdresser, and he married Jane Bosworth, and Jane is buried here too, at All Saints Church in Leicester. The family lived at 144 Churchgate, and they also owned a property at 248 Belgrave Gate. They had 9 children and 5 all died young, and they're all buried here at Welford Road Cemetery, all in roughly the same area. So here we go, we're going to walk round now the cemetery, because I'm now going to walk to Joseph's mother's grave. But this is a little bit of a walk, so I can carry on telling you about Charles Barnabas Merrick. So Charles Barnabas Merrick received money twice from the Thomas Waite charity to help him set up his business as a hairdresser, a barber's and a tobacconist's in Leicester. Now in 1886, Charles was fined for neglecting to have his children vaccinated against smallpox, and he was fined 10 shillings. You can just see the size of this cemetery. I'll tell you a bit about the cemetery as well as I'm walking to Mary Potterton's grave. So a bit more about Charles. In 1853, it actually became compulsory to have infants vaccinated within the first 3 months of life. If parents defaulted, they would be fined or imprisoned. And obviously Charles Barnabas Merrick defaulted and he was fined. But by 1898, the Royal Commission removed the penalties. Now Jane Merrick, Joseph's auntie, was married to Charles. She died in 1916, and Charles died in 1925, aged 79. So here we are walking through Welford Road Cemetery. Now this is the oldest municipal cemetery in Leicester. Some people say you're in the dead centre of Leicester. Yes, a bit of humour there. So here we are. Right, so in the early 1840s, Leicester had 7 churchyards, 17 burial grounds, but they could no longer cope with the dead. Complaints multiplied about the smell, and in 1843 a council appointed a special committee that concluded that most of the churchyards were actually or nearly full, and in 1845 the council decided to build this cemetery. So here we are, we've now reached the grave of Mary Jane Merrick, Joseph's mother. So we're going to take a little walk up. So I hope you've had a good look at Welford Road Cemetery so far. So here we go, I'm just going to turn myself around. So here we are at the grave of Mary Jane Merrick, the mother of Joseph Carey Merrick. Let's have a little close up. Mary Jane Potterton Merrick, and then some more Pottertons. Let me stand back a little bit. So Mary Jane Merrick, Joseph's mother, born Mary Jane Potterton in 1837 to Elizabeth and William Potterton. She was the 3rd eldest child of 8 children. She was born in Evington and lived in Stoughton, villages to the east of Leicester, and the family moved to Thurmaston to follow the agricultural trade. Mary Jane worked at a tallow maker's on Cank Street in Leicester, so if you know our town at all, it is roughly where St Martin's Arcade or shopping centre is now. She married Joseph Rockley Merrick in December 1861, and she was already 2 months pregnant. They lived on Lee Street, and Joseph was born in August 1862. With a little scan of the cemetery. There we go. They had 3 children, so Joseph was born first, then it was followed by William Arthur, who was born in 1866, then Marion Eliza, who was born in 1867. Now Marion died in 1891, just a year after her brother Joseph, and she was only 24. She's buried with her father at Belgrave Cemetery, and we will go there soon. So when Mary Jane was buried here, it was a common grave. The first person, or the first soul, to be buried in this common grave was her second son, William Arthur. So William Arthur died, he was 4 years old, and he died in 1870 of scarlet fever. And he was buried on Christmas Day in 1870. So he's buried here and it was unmarked. Of course, 3 years later, Mary Jane followed him and it was still an unmarked grave. Now his mother, Mary Jane, she died aged 36 of bronchopneumonia. Now, when Mary Jane and William were buried here, it was a common unmarked grave. There wasn't anybody else here, so William was first, followed by Mary. Well, in 1877, Mary Jane's sister Elizabeth, she died. She was also buried here, and it is now a marked grave. Elizabeth Potterton died of a stroke, aged 39. Back a little bit. And there are also 2 more people buried here, which makes it into a very good family plot. You've got John Potterton, he's buried here, and John Potterton was Elizabeth's husband. And yes, they both have the same surname, Potterton, because John Potterton was Elizabeth and Mary Jane's first cousin once removed. Only 6 months after Elizabeth and John married, she died. And then he remarried a lady called Anne Ross, who was also née Warren, who was born Anne Potterton. Yes, another Potterton. Anne was also Elizabeth and Mary Jane's first cousin on their mother's side. So this really is a family Potterton grave. Now their marriage produced 6 children. Now Anne died on the 11th of April 1888 and she is buried here as well. She died 2 months after the birth of her twins. In 1889, John Potterton married again to Mary Ann Thompson, and then again in 1891 to another Mary Ann. Mary Ann Thompson, the third wife, died at the Leicester Borough Asylum in 1909, and she's buried somewhere in this cemetery in an unmarked grave, nowhere near her husband and her husband's previous wives. John died in 1902 and he is buried here as well, with 2 of his wives. So we have, let's have a look at the gravestone. First of all, we have Mary Jane Potterton Merrick. She died on the 29th of May 1873. This does say the 19th of May, but her death certificate says the 29th of May. The loving mother of Joseph Merrick, also John, William and Marion. Now she was the mother of William and Marion. John Merrick, who is listed here, belonged to another Merrick family that lived on Lee Street. But of course we all know how confusing research can be. Because the name Merrick and because it was on Lee Street, John was actually linked to Mary Jane, but he wasn't anything to do with this actual Merrick family. But all in all, he is still remembered. But John has nothing to do with this specific Merrick family. But it's nice that his name's there. The other grave, this is the grave when it became a family grave. So we have, you can see Elizabeth Potterton, John Potterton. Further down is Anne. So there's John again. So John would have bought this plot when his wife Elizabeth died. Actually, Elizabeth was his second wife because he had married previously in the village of Astley on the Northamptonshire border. So his first wife was Betsy. He then married Elizabeth. He then married Anne. He then married 2 Mary Anns. So he had quite a few wives. I think if he did a documentary, it'd be quite startling as to how many wives he did actually have. So here you are. This is the grave of Mary Jane Potterton, Joseph's mother. So thank you for joining me on this little walk in Welford Road Cemetery to introduce you to the Merrick and the Potterton family. So I really hope you've actually enjoyed it, and I hope if you haven't seen my other 2 videos yet of Joseph's life that you do actually sit and watch them, because it's probably not what you actually expect. So I'm now going to leave Welford Road Cemetery. In a few days I shall go to Belgrave Cemetery, and I'm also going to do a YouTube of Joseph Merrick's Leicester, so you can actually see where Joseph lived and where he worked, and you can also see what remains of the Leicester Union Workhouse. So thank you very much for joining me, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. So I shall see you soon. Goodbye.